We should attack Germany not in order to save a particular victim, but in order to pull down the bully. Neville Chamberlain, 20th March. Whereas the Prime Minister was once a strong advocate of peace, he has now definitely swung around to the war point of view. At present, there was no point of difference between Chamberlain and Halifax. Joseph Kennedy, 20th March. The Foreign Secretary said that the primary question would not be, can we give direct assistance to Poland or Romania, but can we conduct a successful war against Germany? Whatever the cause of the war might be, that was the principal question. Record of Anglo-French conversation, 21st March. The British feel that Russia may go along with them, not to serve the general cause, but to serve whatever purpose they have in mind. If they do agree to go along with the French and the British, and if Romania and Turkey are prepared to fight, then England is advising France that they should both go to war regardless of Poland. Joseph Kennedy, 22nd March. The French Foreign Minister expressed the view to Halifax that the adherence of Poland to the proposal is of vital importance, and that it should be secured even if Poland had to be threatened. He apparently did not specify in what way Poland could be threatened. Joseph Kennedy, 22nd March. The French Foreign Minister emphasized that to get Poland in was essential, for without Poland, Russian aid would be ineffective. The strongest pressure, even threats, should be put upon Poland. Alexander Cadogan, 22nd March. Halifax felt that the inevitability of war sooner or later should be met right now. Joseph Kennedy, 24th March. The French ambassador said that a new situation had arisen. A declaration was proposed to the following states: Britain, France, Poland, and Russia. In Paris, we understand very well Polish reservations, especially the argument that Poland's adherence to this pact could trigger a conflict. However, for some time now, we have been witnessing a fact of crucial importance: the decision of England to actively intervene in Eastern Europe. The participation of England in the defense of Eastern Europe is taking shape very quickly. Jan Schembeck, 24th March. Germany risks defeat only if confronted by a two-front war and blockade. Such blockade can only be effective if the Eastern Front is on Germany's frontiers. George Ogilvy Forbes, 25th March. The Polish ambassador came yesterday with Beck's counterproposal for a secret understanding with Britain to consult as to action in the event of aggression. Poland cannot agree to any public declaration in which Russia is involved. Poland is terrified of any publicity. Halifax, however, is sure that we cannot agree to any secret agreement with Poland due to Parliament. What we want is to secure the certainty for Germany of a war on two fronts, East and West, in the event of any aggression by her. Oliver Harvey, 25th March. The Minister for Coordination of Defense pointed out that as far as Britain was concerned, the worst that could happen would be for us to get involved in war without any allies on the Eastern Front. It should be our objective to obtain the maximum amount of support in Eastern Europe. On the whole, Poland was, from the military point of view, probably the best of potential Eastern allies. The Foreign Secretary said that he had been reflecting on the anxieties which had been voiced by the Minister for Coordination of Defense. He agreed that there was probably no way in which France and ourselves could prevent Poland from being overrun. We were faced with the dilemma of doing nothing or entering into a devastating war. If we did nothing, this would mean a great accession to Germany's strength and a great loss to ourselves of sympathy and support in the United States and in other parts of the world. If we had to choose between two great evils, he favored our going to war. The Prime Minister reminded the committee that the inclusion of Poland in the scheme was vital. Germany's weakness was her inability, at present, to conduct war on two fronts, and unless Poland was with us, Germany would be able to avoid this contingency. If Poland declined to entertain a reciprocal commitment, then nevertheless we should be prepared to give her the unilateral assurance as regards to the Eastern Front, seeing that our object was to check and defeat Germany's expansion. The Secretary of State for Dominion Affairs asked what was to happen if Poland did not resist. The Foreign Secretary thought that in such a case we could not be more papal than the Pope, but the knowledge that Britain and France would come to their support would undoubtedly stiffen Poland in resisting German attempts to undermine her independence. Cabinet meeting, 27th of March. We must ensure that a situation is created in which Germany is forced to take action. Reports of or actual mistreatment of Germans in any country concerned would probably make Hitler act. If we can only convince our potential allies in the East of the fact that Germany is in no position to fight a war on two fronts, there seems every reason why we should do our best to produce a situation leading to such a war and definitely welcome it. Noel Mason McFarlane, 28th March. The Foreign Secretary said that it was clear that if action was to be undertaken in circumstances at all favorable to us, or if the threat of action was to be an effective deterrent, Germany must be faced with war on two fronts simultaneously. Poland was therefore key to the situation. Cabinet meeting, 29th March. At the close of our conversation, I left Ambassador Lipski in no doubt that, in my view, the Polish proposals could not be regarded by the Führer as satisfactory. Only the definite reincorporation of Danzig, an extraterritorial link with East Prussia, a 25-year non-aggression treaty with frontier guarantees, and cooperation in the Slovak question could, in the German view, lead to a final settlement. I have the impression that Poland's compromise proposal might not represent the Polish government's last word. Joachim von Ribbentrop, 26 March. On 28 March, Mr. Arciszewski inferred that Berlin had put forward no definite desiderata. He now admits that 3 very positive desiderata have been communicated within the last fortnight. Beck is evidently on the fence. Richard Spate, 30th March. An important military implication is that if such a guarantee were to encourage an intransigent attitude on the part of Poland, it would thereby precipitate a European war before our forces were in any way fully prepared for it. Chiefs of Staff report on the military implications of an Anglo-French guarantee of Poland, 28 March. The Prime Minister said that he was somewhat uneasy at the fact that our ambassador in Warsaw could obtain no information as to the progress of the negotiations between Germany and Poland. One possible, but very distasteful explanation of this was that Polish negotiators were, in fact, giving way to Germany. Cabinet meeting, 30th March. A German-Polish deal would, in the long run, be highly disadvantageous to us. It would defeat the policy of forming a bloc against Germany. We are encouraging Poland to resist German demands, and in view of the importance to Poland, as much psychological as material, of the status of the Free City, we may be forced to support Polish rights in Danzig. Roger Mackens, 30th March. The Lord Chancellor thought that we should not encourage Poland to go to war with Germany over Danzig. He also suggested that it would be difficult to make a public statement that could not be construed as an attempt by us to prevent the Germans from trying to absorb Danzig. The Prime Minister said that if the Poles regarded the Danzig issue as constituting a threat to their independence and were prepared to resist by force, then we should have to come to their help. The Minister for Coordination of Defense said there was no doubt that it would be impossible to prevent Poland from being overrun. The Chiefs of Staff indeed thought that Poland would likely be overrun by Germany within 2 or 3 months. Nevertheless, Germany would suffer heavy casualties in the process and would leave considerable forces in the occupation of Poland. The Minister of Health said that the upshot of the advice of the Chiefs of Staff was that it was better to fight with Poland as an ally than without. He thought, therefore, we ought to take steps to ensure that Poland did resist Germany. Cabinet meeting, 30th March. In the event of any action which clearly threatened Polish independence, and which the Polish government accordingly considered it vital to resist with their national forces, His Majesty's government would feel themselves bound at once to lend the Polish government all support in their power. They have given the Polish government an assurance to this effect. Neville Chamberlain's guarantee to Poland, 31st March. I met Rosiński, coming back from the House of Commons, seemingly pleased. The die is now cast and Hitler may bomb us, but I think we've done right. Alexander Cadogan, 31st March. The British felt that if the crisis was coming, it had better come now. Pierpont Moffat, 31st March. I asked Cadogan whether this meant if Poland fights, then Britain fights. He said if Poland committed an act of aggression, it would not mean that. But for the first time in the history of Great Britain, they have left the final decision as to their fighting to the other power. I asked Cadogan could there be any judging on the part of Great Britain as to whether Poland was fighting for Polish independence. He said absolutely not. If Poland thought any gesture of Germany threatened their independence and they themselves are the judges of that, Great Britain commits itself to fight. Joseph Kennedy, 31st March. I gather Mason McFarlane will approve our action today. Alexander Cadogan, 31st March. What to say of a time and country where charlatans and dupes are confused? Probably because charlatans are dupes. Gentlemen declare that we are in a state of imminent hostilities, Hérault de Seychelles once said, who then declared himself won over to the party of war by the force of reason. Anatole de Moncy, 1st April. I am no more a man of war today than I was in September. Neville Chamberlain, 3rd April. The House rises at 10:50 p.m., and I am taken down to the smoking room with Maskey, Churchill, and Lloyd George. Churchill adopts the direct method of attack. Now look here, Mr. Maskey, if we are to make a success of this new policy, we require the help of Russia. Harold Nicholson, 3rd April. According to reports here, the decisions in London seems to have been made very hurriedly. I learned from circles in close contact with the British Embassy here that the news of such far-reaching assurances to Poland came as a complete surprise, even to Kennard, the British ambassador. Hans Adolf von Moltke, 4th April. I should have thought that our great object was to get the two-way guarantee with Poland. Such an arrangement would have a profound effect on the undecideds, and even in the long run, on Italy and Japan. I myself think that, if attained, it would lead to war, but to a war for which the nation is ready and we should probably win. In pursuit of this object, we should use all possible pressure, including threats. Gladwin Jebb, 4th April. The Prime Minister said that the interests of Poland and Great Britain were the same, neither wanted war, or to impose unreasonable restrictions on Germany. He agreed that the gravest matters were at stake. It was essential that they should not find themselves left with the worst of both worlds, namely to find that they had provoked Germany without providing themselves with effective defense. The Prime Minister asked whether any discussions were at present going on between Poland and Germany about Danzig. Beck replied that no negotiations were in progress, but that conversations about Danzig had been going on for some time. Record of Anglo-Polish conversations, 4th April. Ambassador Rosinski was questioned as to whether there had been any recent negotiations with Germany. He gave an assurance that there had been none. The German government had never put forward any definite demands, either as regards the corridor or Danzig. The most that could be said was that there had been occasional feelers. Edward Halifax, 6th April. The Prime Minister said that it would be unsatisfactory for His Majesty's government to publish a declaration in which on the British side there should be no reservation, while on the Polish side there should be a reservation. Mr. Beck suggested that it might perhaps be said that the two countries had agreed to consult together whenever there was a threat directed against either of the two countries which might involve them in war. The Prime Minister said that he did not much like talking about consultations. Democratic governments were always being mocked because they could not promise anything more definite than consultations. Mr. Beck replied that he would not press the point. He was merely trying to find a formula. Record of Anglo-Polish conversations, 5th April. It was agreed that the two countries were prepared to enter into an agreement of a permanent and reciprocal character to replace the present temporary and unilateral assurance given by His Majesty's government to the Polish government on the 31st of March. Pending the completion of the permanent agreement, Mr. Beck gave His Majesty's government an assurance that the Polish government would consider themselves under an obligation to render assistance to His Majesty's government under the same conditions as those contained in the temporary assurance already given by His Majesty's government to Poland. Anglo-Polish Declaration, 6th April. Imbeciles, Anatole de Moncy, 6th April. Mr. Tilea then inquired whether the guarantee to Romania, if we should give it, would apply against all countries, i.e., against the Russians, as well as against Germany. I pointed out to him that the whole basis of the arrangement which we had proposed was that of resistance to the threat of German domination in Europe, and that all that we were trying to do was devised with that object. We had never considered the question of guaranteeing either Poland or Romania against the Russians. Alexander Cadogan, 7th April. Beck reminded me of a remark he once said, that if war were to be declared on Germany, it would be decided in Paris. After having visited London, however, he said he felt that the point where it would be decided to declare war on Germany was about mid-channel. Anthony Biddle, April 1939. Beck's visit to London was an event of great importance. It marked the practical inauguration of the so-called Peace Front. It represented for Poland the starting point of a reversal of alliances. Edward Rosinski, 13th August. The Anglo-Polish Alliance is regarded here as one of the cornerstones of European security. As to this, it is only fair to add that there has been a certain fear in many quarters lest Poland should be dragged into quarreling with Germany when it was not in her true interest to do so. But if isolation is impossible for Britain, it is even more dangerous for Poland, and the net reaction of public opinion has been one of very real satisfaction. Howard Kennard, 8th April. While I was in Poland, nobody spoke to me of war, apart from a Polish general who remarked with a smile, "We will soon have to fight." In Paris, the French government reasons with Beck's cautiousness, however. They fail to take into account the excitement of the Polish people, cheering upon his return from London, a previously unpopular minister, derided and criticized, now suddenly promoted to popularity because British guarantees appeared to make him warlike. Antele de Monzi, 17th April. The fact that Hitler did not instantly strike out against Poland on the heels of Chamberlain's declaration suggests to my mind that Hitler may have adopted alternative tactics aimed at inspiring relaxation amongst the political circles throughout Europe. Anthony Biddle, April 1939. You said the other day that you wanted to gain time because every month gave us 600 more airplanes. By delaying, we gain 600 airplanes a month. We also perhaps consolidate British opinion and protect ourselves from any charge of warmongering. Oliver Harvey to Edward Halifax, 11th April. The Foreign Secretary said that if Yugoslavia was intimidated and was hesitating as to her attitude, ought we to say that if she resisted, we would support her by going to war? The Minister for Coordination of Defense thought that we might be able to say this at a later stage when we had mobilized other powers in Eastern Europe. Cabinet meeting, 11th April. On the German side, there is still hope of reaching an amicable agreement with Poland. There seem to be considerations for resuming contacts and exchanges of views. Regarding the specific issue of Danzig, the German press has so far refrained from addressing it head-on. The problem has not been presented to public opinion. The Führer's prestige with his people is therefore not yet at stake. His freedom of maneuver remains intact. In any case, one thing seems undeniable. Before resorting to measures that could provoke an armed conflict with Poland, Germany does not want to neglect any means of resolving its disputes with Poland through the method that has so far served the Chancellor well, namely without war. Christian de Vaux Saint-Cyr, 11th April. The Foreign Secretary reported that he had now received a telegram from Berlin in regard to relations between Germany and Poland. The upshot of the report was that Herr Hitler was now dealing with these negotiations himself, but that not much progress was being made. This was attributed to the fact that the Poles were adopting a more intractable attitude since they had obtained our guarantee. Cabinet meeting, 19th April. The Polish government cannot consent that the enjoyment of their fundamental rights should be under the control of a third party, nor cannot the Polish government accept any unilateral decisions in regard to the Danzig question. Joseph Beck to all Polish diplomatic missions abroad, 20th April. I can see the encirclement argument. The faults of the past have produced Hitler, and now in our necessity, we are forced to start a new encirclement to stop him. Oliver Harvey, 21st April. In view of indications of increasing Polish intransigence since conclusion of the Anglo-Polish Guarantee Agreement, the British ambassador to Poland has been instructed to bring to Beck's attention that because of the British guarantee of Poland, Great Britain expects Poland to approach the problem of Danzig in a reasonable manner and to keep this government fully informed of developments. Joseph Kennedy, 22nd April. Under the British guarantee, the responsibility for reaching a solution on Danzig had been left to the Poles. Indeed, the new intransigence of the Poles was so disturbing that the Foreign Office took it upon itself to suggest to the Poles that they approach the question with reasonableness. Joseph Kennedy, April 1939. I talked to the Polish ambassador. He says that they would accept the Autobahn to East Prussia, but they would not accept complete German rule over Danzig. They would instead accept a condominium. True it was that in the old days, Beck had been obliged to adopt a pendulum policy. All that was now over. He would now fight. Harold Nicholson, 23rd April. Biddle joined us for dinner at the U.S. Embassy. He emphasized that Poland is at the forefront of Europe and that England, France, and the United States consider our army as a sort of European force, which implies commitments from these states towards Poland. He pointed out that he collaborates every day, very actively with the American ambassadors of France and England, who have a lot of sympathy for Poland. Jan Schembeck, 25th April. The speech delivered by Mussolini on the 20th of April at the Capitoline clearly did not please the German leadership. At a time when the Reich had not given up hope of intimidating Poland or the powers determined to support its resistance, it was found in Berlin that Mussolini's speech was too conciliatory and that it had weakened Germany's position in advance. Christian de Vaux Saint-Cyr, 25th April. From the obligation now assumed by the Polish government, it appears that, in the event of a possible Anglo-German conflict, Poland intends to intervene with an attack on Germany, even should this conflict not affect Poland or her interests. Note from the German government to the Polish government, 27th April. I considered it necessary to make it clear to the government of Poland that just as they desire access to the sea, so Germany needs access to East Prussia. These are both difficult problems. It was not Germany that created them, but rather the men of Versailles, who either in their maliciousness or their thoughtlessness placed powder kegs with lighted fuses all around Europe. Consequently, I submitted the following proposal to the Polish government. Danzig returns to Germany. Germany receives a railway line through the corridor at her own expense. In return, Germany is prepared to recognize all Polish economic rights in Danzig, ensure for Poland a free harbor in Danzig of any size desired, to accept the frontiers between Germany and Poland as final, conclude a 25-year non-aggression treaty with Poland, a treaty, therefore, which would extend beyond my own lifetime, and a joint German-Polish-Hungarian guarantee of Slovakia. The Polish government rejected this offer and have only declared that they are prepared to negotiate on the question of a substitute for the League of Nations Commissioner and to consider facilities for transit traffic through the corridor. Adolf Hitler, 28th April. I can now see no alternative between early war upon a false issue or the abandonment of the whole of Europe to German domination. Harold Nicholson, 29th April. This latest attempt by Chancellor Hitler to reach an understanding with Poland implicitly contains a very clear threat in case Poland persists in associating itself with the forming peace front. By making the debate public, he further reduces the chances of agreement. On both sides, precise positions have been taken. Leon Noel, 29th April. The Foreign Secretary thought that it would be dangerous to allow ourselves to get into a position in which the issue of war or peace depended solely on the judgment of the Polish government. On the other hand, it was of the utmost importance that no action or words of ours should suggest that we were trying to wiggle out from the commitments which we had given. Lord Perth had told him that Hitler's offer was one which, if it had been made 10 years ago, would willingly have been accepted by Poland. Cabinet meeting, 3rd May. We have at last succeeded in worming the facts out of the Poles. They have all along shown a remarkable disinclination to tell us the truth. Right up to April 20th, Ambassador Radzynski continued to deny all knowledge of the negotiations with Germany. He may well have not been informed by Warsaw of what was going on. Beck and Archizewski, however, cannot be acquitted. The latter in particular deliberately misled Sir Kennard on the 28th of March, 2 days after the receipt of the German proposals, when he gave it to be understood that no proposals had been made at all. Beck was equally misleading in what he said to us in London, for he still gave the impression that there merely had been an informal exchange of ideas instead of definite proposals and counter-proposals. Even when he professed to give Sir Kennard an honest explanation on the 23rd of April, he still only told part of the truth, making no mention of the proposed 25-year frontier guarantee or the tripartite guarantee of Slovakia. At the time of our guarantee of the 31st of March, our information was based on what Mr. Arkasiewski had told Sir Kennard on the 29th of March. We had no knowledge of the concessions that accompanied the desiderata. Richard Spate, 4th May. Ribbentrop asked me yesterday whether Beck had informed His Majesty's government, when he was in London, of the German proposals. I was obliged to say that I honestly did not know, to which Ribbentrop replied that his information was to the effect that he did not. I am appalled at our fate being in the hands of the Poles. Personally, I am inclined to believe that Hitler, as the Italian ambassador tells me, regards time to be on his side and would prefer to play a waiting game. If the Poles believe that such is Hitler's intention, it is they who will seek to precipitate an incident. Neville Henderson, 4th May. As early as 4th May, the London Times bluntly stated that Danzig was not worth a war. One of the leading foreign correspondents in Warsaw informed me that London had telephoned him several times asking why the Poles had refused what seemed like reasonable proposals, and at the same time adding that in British political circles there was considerable anxiety and bewilderment. Anthony Biddle, May 1939. The British ambassador informed me, quite confidentially, that he received a message today from the British ambassador in Berlin. He notes that the whole world is waiting for Beck to speak, and what he says will determine war or peace, while reserving the point that he is very far from wanting to meddle in our affairs or to submit any suggestions. Kennard noted that he hoped that the minister's speech would not close the door to the possibility of some détente. Jens Schembeck, 3rd May. On 5th May, I accepted an invitation to the Luncheon Club in Manchester, where I spoke about Polish affairs. At my request, a wireless receiver was set up so that I could listen to Beck's speech. 5 of us sat in armchairs around the small radio set, from which a voice, intelligible only to me, spoke about the troubles of my distant country. The keynote of the speech was Poland's honor and the defense of her precious and dearly bought independence. I did my best not to show undue emotion in front of my kindly host, Edward Ryczynski, 5th May.
My w Polsce nie znamy pojęcia pokoju za wszelką cenę. Jest jedna tylko rzecz w życiu ludzi, narodów i państw, która jest bezcenna. Tą rzeczą jest honor.
If Poland had accepted the German proposals, the establishment in the east of a rampart against the German drive would have become impossible. Robert Coulondre, 9th May. Kennard did not seem entirely satisfied with the course of events which had taken place as a result of the British move, and had to admit in the end that Beck's remark about the pointlessness of the German frontier guarantee would not have been conceivable before the Anglo-Polish agreement had been concluded. Hans Adolf von Moltke, 10th May. We fully realize the importance of our collaboration with England. We know that Britain's resources are vast. Its navy and air force are the most powerful in the world. But we also know what we bring to this alliance. Our army, one of the best in Europe in terms of size, spirit, and quality in terms of its leaders and soldiers. Furthermore, we bring the vigilant, determined, and unanimous attitude of the Polish nation, which is a factor of primary importance. We see in this alliance the strongest barrier against German pressure. Jan Schembeck, 3rd May. I have no doubt that if the Polish government wished to establish that there was clearly a threat, they would naturally consult with His Majesty's government and would do so before taking any irrevocable action. If the Polish government fear that some immediate threat may develop requiring instantaneous counteraction on their part, for which there would be no time for consultation, I think they should inform us now of the manner in which they think such a threat might develop and of the steps which they would contemplate to counter it. Edward Halifax to Howard Kennard, 3rd May. It is essential that I should have some indication of the Polish attitude in the event of such a situation arising, which would be intermediate between a mere expression by Danzig of a desire for union with Germany and a German military occupation. Please discuss with Beck and elicit his views as soon as possible. Edward Halifax to Howard Kennard, 10th May. I put these considerations before Beck today. He said if Danzig, as a result of any desire to obtain union with Germany, took any action against Polish interests or persons, the Polish government would react in an energetic manner. Beck had told the German ambassador in March that any unilateral action by Danzig would lead to an appropriate reaction on the part of the Polish government. Howard Kennard to Edward Halifax, 10th May. Precipitate reaction by Poland would likely render war inevitable. Full-scale hostilities could be suspended, if only for a period. Knowledge that Britain, France, and, as we hope, Russia are behind Poland might yet induce Germany to consider reasonable settlement. If, for instance, Danzig voted for union with the Reich and were able to make a display of force without actually resorting to violence, I should hope it might be possible for the Polish government to hold their hand, to give us time to make it clear to the German government that we should be behind Poland in resisting any forcible or unilateral solution. This warning might be accompanied by certain military measures on our part. On further consideration, I feel it would be very desirable that you should have another talk with Beck on the above lines, urging the necessity of consultation before taking irrevocable action in doubtful cases where Poland might be maneuvered into the position of initiating the use of force against Danzig. Edward Halifax to Howard Kennard, 26th May. Kasprzycki showed me the text of the protocol which summarized the results of the talks between him and Gamelin. It contained a statement that, in case of war between Poland and Germany, the French armed forces would, from the 15th day after mobilization was announced, begin an offensive against Germany by means of its main striking forces. Juliusz Lukasiewicz, May 1939. Should the security or other vital interests of one of the contracting parties be threatened from outside, the other contracting party will afford the threatened party its full political and diplomatic support in order to remove this threat. Pact of Friendship and Alliance between Germany and Italy, 22nd May. Gamelin was greeted in London by Hor Belisha, the British Minister of War, who included in his toast an interesting remark. Your ancestors once said, "Gentlemen of England, fire the first shot." What does this mean? Our troops would only be cannon fodder. I ponder this remark to exact a threat or an assurance. Until de Monzi, 8th June. Burckhardt had an interesting conversation with Weizsäcker regarding Hitler's mood. The events of recent weeks and the reaction of the West have given him a shock, which could easily lead to a halt in actions and a more measured approach, provided that the fear of a preventative war from the West does not lead him to the conclusion that he must take the initiative into his own hands. The fear of a preventative war was repeated several times by Weizsäcker. Marian Chodacki, 3rd June. I told the State Secretary that a preventative war was no policy which either His Majesty's government or the British public would ever tolerate or regard as a practical solution. Weizsäcker replied that he could not conceal from me that there were many people in Germany who were convinced that a preventative war was indeed contemplated by His Majesty's government. Neville Henderson, 13th June. His Majesty's government expressed the hope that in the event of the Danzig government making a display of force without actively resorting to violence, the Polish government might be able to hold their hand to give time for His Majesty's government to make it clear to the German government that Poland would be supported in resisting unilateral solution. Beck agreed and asked for information in regards to the preparatory military measures. He considered that such measures should reassure Polish public opinion and remove any doubt that the diplomatic intervention of His Majesty's government could end in proposing a compromise unacceptable to Poland. British Foreign Office Memorandum, 21st June. The Foreign Secretary said that Beck found it difficult to be more specific as to the action he would take in the event of an attempted coup in Danzig. Cabinet meeting, 5th July. Recent occurrences in Danzig have inevitably given rise to fears that it is intended to settle her future status by unilateral action, organized by surreptitious methods, thus presenting Poland and other powers with a fait accompli. In such circumstances, any action taken by Poland to restore the situation would be represented as an act of aggression on her part, and if her action were supported by other powers, they would be accused of aiding and abetting her in the use of force. If the sequence of events should in fact be such as is contemplated on this hypothesis, honorable members will realize from what I have said earlier that the issue could not be considered as a purely local matter involving the rights and liberties of the Danzigers, which incidentally are in no way threatened, but would at once raise graver issues affecting Polish national existence and independence. We have guaranteed to give our assistance to Poland in the case of a clear threat to her independence, which she considers it vital to resist with her national forces, and we are firmly resolved to carry out this undertaking. Neville Chamberlain, 10th July. The Danzig authorities say that Danzig must defend itself against possible aggression by the Poles. This argument, for that matter, is not pure propaganda. It corresponds to a real anxiety on the part of the population. Leon Noel, 10th July. Georges Bonnet imparted to me before the cabinet meeting a very wise opinion from Neville Henderson, the British ambassador in Berlin. In case of a new crisis, it will no longer be Chamberlain that can save the peace, only Mussolini. Anatole de Monzy, 11th July. The Poles have a plan for dealing with Danzig, but they won't divulge it. I and a French general are to go and deal directly with Rid Smigli and find out what it is. Edmund Ironside, 4th July. The Poles seem to have too low an opinion of the German army. They consider it over-motorized. Apparently, the war effort in Poland in the way of arms factories is incredible. Edmund Ironside, 13th July. I asked Mr. Chodacki how Poland visualized British military assistance. He cautiously dodged this question, merely emphasizing that Britain was now manufacturing 1,500 aircraft per month, that Britain had a territorial army of 1 million, and that Britain had aircraft carriers that could give Poland effective assistance. Arthur Greiser, 18th July. Our army is daily growing in numbers and efficiency. As to our Air Force, well, I mustn't give you figures, but I will tell you that it has been expanding at a rate during these last 12 months, which is far in excess of our own expectations. Neville Chamberlain, 27 June. General Carton de Wyatt met General Ironside last night. He gives great importance to Ironside's visit to Warsaw. The British have finally understood the situation, and Chamberlain is determined not to joke anymore. General Carton de Wyatt emphasized that General Ironside is destined to occupy a position similar to that of Lord Haig during the last war. Jan Schembeck, 18th July. General Ironside started the conference by giving Rid Smigli an assurance that Poland could rely absolutely on Great Britain. Mr. de Segan, 20th of July. The French plan is purely defensive. They have lied to the Poles in saying that they are going to attack Germany in the West. Edmund Ironside, 26th of July. Forster appeared before me in full uniform with a white cap and white gloves. He solemnly declared to me, "I bring you the latest news from the Chancellor." His position regarding Danzig is the one he formulated in his Reichstag speech. It is unchanged. My Führer believes that everything must be resolved peacefully. It is not worth the trouble to risk a conflict over Danzig. Karl Burkhardt, 30th of July. The next morning I went to see Chodacki. He asked the question, which I had also been asking myself, what does this maneuver mean? Could it be a feint? Chodacki said, it is a maneuver to separate us from our allies. We must be cautious. The tension relieved, and we moved on to other subjects, and recounted all the transgressions of the Danzigers towards the Polish minority. At that moment the telephone rang. He picked up the receiver, spoke a few words, and then slammed the receiver on the table. The atmosphere had completely changed. No, 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 I will not concede. I shall concede nothing. They shall have what they deserve. With these people there is only one thing: war. They have just murdered a loyal border guard before the eyes of his wife, and so our meeting ended. Karl Burkhardt recounting the events of the 31st of July. The Polish government has just taken measures of economic reprisal, which may have grave consequences. Guy de la Tournelle, 1st August. Poles have withdrawn inspector from a large margarine factory and will not recognize certificates of origin for its products issued in Danzig. This will have the effect of subjecting product to a higher rate of duty and making export to Poland impossible. Poles have also stopped the import of herrings caught by Danzig boats. Francis Shepard, 1st August. Mr. Arkaszewski was naturally not very explicit concerning the tactics which his government might adopt, but in all probability, the Polish government has chosen not to remain passive in the face of German actions in the Free City. Mr. de Segan, 2nd August. The view generally held here is that this regrettable disagreement has arisen rather as a result of ill-timed action by Poland than in the course of any maneuver for a customs union with Germany, but that it might be used for that end. Francis Shepard, 3rd August. A few days ago, Burckhardt made contact with the Polish commissioner in Danzig, Chodaki, who accorded him a very unfriendly reception, probably because of Burckhardt's views on the customs inspector's dispute, which he believes that the Poles are substantially in the wrong. In this conversation, Burckhardt informed Chodaki of the Führer's desire for a détente in the Danzig question. He then stated that if Poland did not come round on the customs inspector's dispute, Danzig would take countermeasures. At first, Chodaki asked with a smile as to what countermeasures could Danzig take anyway. When Burckhardt answered that Danzig could open the East Prussian frontier, the Polish commissioner became grave and said emphatically, "For Poland, that means war." He would at once get in touch with Foreign Minister Beck to obtain fresh information. German Foreign Office Memorandum, 4th August. The unknown factor today was whether or not the British, having placed the pistol in the hands of Poland, could prevail upon her not to fire. I question whether Beck could save face, even if he wanted to, without being overthrown or assassinated. Pierpont Moffat, 3rd August. Acting on instructions from the Danzig Senate, on August 4th, the Danzig customs officials on the East Prussian frontier informed the Polish customs inspectors that as from August 6th, they would not be allowed to exercise their functions of control. In answer to this, we are, without delay, addressing a note to the Danzig Senate. Michał Łubienski, 4th August. The question that will be posed to Germany, war or peace, Illustrated Daily Courier, 5th August. I do not doubt that you, Mr. President of the Senate, have no doubts that such an infringement of the fundamental rights of Poland would under no pretext be tolerated by the Polish government. Should the above-mentioned abuses take place, the Polish government will retaliate without delay against the Free City. Polish Ultimatum to Danzig, August 4th. The Polish commissioner to Danzig telephoned the President of the Senate at 1 o'clock in the morning, and half an hour later sent him an ultimatum. That same morning, he had risked a panic by sending away women and children, and at the same time, the Polish press had talked of bombing Danzig. Francis Shepard, recounting the events of August 5th. England, France, and America will follow us. We cannot take the Czech example of surrender. We cannot cut and run. A nation can physically die, but its spirit will live on. This is our only chance. This is why we shall have war. Ignacy Mościcki, 6th August. We shall repel by all means at our disposal every attempt, direct or indirect, to damage or violate the interests, rights, and dignity of our state. Edward Rydz-Smigli, 6th August. After Rydz-Smigli's speech yesterday, thousands of Poles joined in, shouting, "We demand Danzig." Daily Mirror, 7th August. Guns which stand guard over Poland's honor are trained on Danzig. If the Danzig authorities intend to face Poland with a fait accompli, these guns will roar. Czas, 7th August. Sternly worded editorials in the Polish press reflected the increasing impatience and irritation of the Polish public over German activities in Danzig. The editorials took their cue from the speech at Krakow, in which the Marshal used such phrases as a clear warning that Polish guns may roar. The conservative paper Czas said, Danzig may have peace and freedom, but she may also become the area for a life and death fight. The Royal Gazette, 8th August. An event of historic significance for all Europe. Marshal Rydz-Smigli's speech was awaited in Paris with increasing tension. Several days ago, the French press announced the speech as an event of pan-European significance, a speech that would clarify Poland's position regarding the Danzig issue. Since Western powers have left Poland completely free to determine the moment in which a casus foederis would arise, it is believed that Marshal Rydz-Smigli spoke not only on behalf of Poland, but also on behalf of France and England, and a dispatch deserving of it. In addition to Marshal Rydz-Smigli's speech, the French press publishes a statement from Minister Beck. The minister stated above all that Poland's military power is enormous. The Polish army is a powerful factor in international relations and makes its weight felt in the European situation. Anger, embarrassment, and falsifications, the reaction of the German press. Illustrated Daily Courier, 8th August. Assistant Polish Commissioner General said to the League of Nations Commissioner that this latest move would test the German attitude and also that of Poland's allies. Dr. Burkhardt begged Mr. Perkowski to realize that Poles were playing this dangerous game, not merely with Danzig, but with the whole of Europe. Francis Shepard, 7th August. Official announcement. Under pressure from Poland, Danzig revoked the orders to remove Polish customs inspectors. Circles close to the French Foreign Office received with great satisfaction the position taken by the Polish government in the note sent to the Danzig Senate, emphasizing its calm and firm tone. The text of this note is recognized by the French Foreign Office as closely corresponding to the viewpoint of French policy, and thus also to that of the English. Illustrated Daily Courier, 7th August. Beck informed the British ambassador that military measures might have been taken had Danzig rejected the Polish ultimatum. Leon Noel, 7th August. The world press, in commenting on this crisis, spread the news that Danzig and Germany had yielded to Polish pressure. The Polish ultimatum had a decisive impact on the development of subsequent events and the attitude of the German chancellor, who on Monday morning summoned the Gauleiter of Danzig. Mr. Forster reported that Hitler had reached the limits of his patience and demanded to know what had caused such a complete failure of his attempts to ease the tension towards the end of July. Forster, possibly echoing Hitler's views, was primarily concerned with the idea that the Polish ultimatum had perhaps arisen under pressure from London and Paris. Karl Burkhardt. According to reports, a short deadline for the ultimatum was set at the request of Marshal Ridge-Smigli. The Marshal had held a conference with Minister Beck and Ambassador Razinski, who returned from London to Warsaw after previously holding a conference with Minister Halifax. Illustrated Daily Courier, 8th August. The Chancellor of the Exchequer said that it was impossible to say when war might break out, if it should break out in some years hence. It was important that those who are responsible for policy to realize that our financial strength was then likely to be much weaker than it is today. The President of the Board of Trade said that it was clear that the strain on our financial position was increasing and that the point would ultimately come when we would be unable to carry a long war. On account of our financial position and strength in armaments, there would come a moment which was the best time for war to break out. It might be desirable to consider whether at such a period we should apply strong pressure on Germany to relax the international tension. Cabinet meeting, 5th July. Should the Polish government persist in maintaining these economic measures, the German government is of the opinion that in such state of affairs, Danzig would have no choice but to seek other opportunities of exporting and importing goods. Note from the German government to the Polish government, 9th August. The Polish government is obliged to warn the German government that in future, as hitherto, Poland will react to any attempt by the Danzig authorities which might tend to compromise the rights and interests which Poland possessed there by virtue of agreements, with the employment of means and measures as they alone shall think fit to adopt, and will consider any future intervention by the German government to the detriment of these rights and interests as an act of aggression. Note from the Polish government to the German government, 10th August. The German minority, a tool of the German Foreign Office. Illustrated Daily Courier. Headline, 10th August. Dull provocateurs do not understand greatness. The Krakow celebrations and the speech of Marshal Ridge-Smigli provoked a wave of crude fabrications and lies in the German press. The Germans are only capable of one thing, which is dull simplicity. The intimidated, frightened, terrorized, and sterilized German soul, devoid of any sincere feeling of enthusiasm in service to ideals, could only resort to barrack-like inventions from the vocabulary of Prussian sergeants. It is no wonder. A nation dulled by soulless propaganda, kept in check by terror, marching on command to all celebrations and party events, each of which is a sham and a provocation to its neighbors, cannot understand that somewhere in the world someone might think differently and might have a deep sense of honor, love for knightly virtues and freedom, a society in which shouts of enthusiasm are given on command and counted with a watch in hand, to which orders are plastered on the facades of houses, on dirty brick banners, which is fed substitutes for physical and spiritual nourishment, is not capable of understanding its own inferiority and must make up for it with a facade. Such a society must fill the spiritual and cultural void with bombastic proclamations and loud, inflated speeches from its leaders. Arrogance, bluster, throwing threats left and right, clanging sabers and showing armed fists. That is the entire spiritual content of the contemporary Germany. Illustrated Daily Courier, 10th August. The existence of a Polish threat of economic measures from the 19th July onwards clearly made the atmosphere somewhat unfriendly. Francis Shepard, 10th August. The League of Nations commissioner is greatly disappointed that efforts towards a détente have been definitely shattered by the Polish ultimatum of August 4th. He is distrustful of Beck and pessimistic about Polish intentions, which he considers unduly warlike. Francis Shepard, 11th August. Józef Potocki said that it probably would have been preferable to have not published the provisional agreement with England before the speeches of Hitler and Beck. Unfortunately, these considerations are now in the past. The final agreement with England must be concluded as soon as possible. Jan Schembeck, 12th August. The fact that the Polish government did not inform the British and French governments of the terms of the note of 10th August further aggravated the situation, since Hitler felt that Poland was acting on her own, regardless of us. Neville Henderson, 14th August. The Poles had threatened severe economic reprisals and were privately making threats of military action. Beck thought that Danzig had climbed down and published his success in the press. Burckhardt was very critical of the Poles. His view is that the local questions at issue in Danzig could have been settled if the Poles had not sent in their ultimatum. He thinks it was not justified and is not satisfied on the evidence that the Danzig Senate had intended to proceed against the Polish customs inspectors, though he agreed that there had been talk of the possibility arising from the Polish threat to take further economic measures than those already enacted on the 1st of this month. He criticized the Polish methods of reprisal. Each time the Danzigers arrested one Pole, the Poles arrested two Danzigers. He maintains that the Poles are apprehensive and that many think that if peace is preserved, Poland will still be threatened and in a bad strategic position, and that Poland therefore has little to lose by a conflict. Roger Mackens, 14th August. When asked whether he believed that Poland was militarily superior to Germany, Gluchowski, the Vice Minister for War, answered, "But of course, Hans Adolf von Moltke, 28th March." Stasiewicz honestly believes that Germany is not ready for war, so logically, when he assesses the situation, he does not believe in a conflict. Jan Schembeck, 4th April. Many Poles are not only talking about defending themselves, but they are also talking about attacking Germany, demanding a war to put an end to German hegemony and free Europe from the nightmare that haunts it. It would be easy to cite numerous examples of this state of mind every day. For example, it had been reported that during a violent discussion, Marshal Rids Smigley shot Minister Beck, that the same minister and his wife were seriously injured in an attack, or that they had been imprisoned. These rumors are obviously evidence of the population's unrest. Leon Noel, 5th April. Ciano said, "What help can England give you? They are too far away." I replied, "What help can Japan give you?" Ciano asked, "What help can France give? They would be defeated within 2 weeks." I said the French expressed the same certainty in their victory. Ciano said the Axis is invincible. I said it will be crushed. Jan Schembeck, 15th May. The military authorities here, typifying the feelings of the Polish government, would sooner lay Danzig in ruins than to permit its seizure and militarization by Germany. Anthony Biddle, 20th May. General Litwinowicz told me that if Hitler decides on war, he will lose it. If he does not, then he has already lost it. The most favorable moment for him was in March, when our preparations were not ready and commitments from the British and French were uncertain. The first phase of the war may be very hard for us, but there can be no doubt about our victory. Jan Schembeck, 27th May. The Poles have a much lower opinion of the German army than we have. Many of them think a war is inevitable and that it is better to have it now and get it over with. They state their belief that the situation in Germany is favorable to Poland now and may not be later. The grounds for this belief are not apparent, nor could the Poles explain them. Report by the British delegation of the Anglo-Polish Staff Conversations, 12th of June, 1939. My French colleague said he had heard it was being advocated in military circles that it was essential for Poland to go to war now, while the German army had not reached its full potential, owing to a shortage of officers, and while Britain and France might still be expected to give Poland their full support, rather than to wait 6 months, for instance, until the German army had attained maximum potential and Britain and France had distanced themselves. Howard Kennard, 28 June. According to Leon Noel, the statements of the German ambassador prove that the Germans are counting on the wear and gradual exhaustion of the solidarity of the peace front, which would allow Germany, at the opportune moment, to impose its terms on us. Jan Schembeck, 26 May. The Poles have not considered what action they would take if the Germans staged their main attack in the West. They have no plans prepared for this and merely suggest that it will be easier for them to pass to the offensive in the most suitable direction. When asked in which direction, they could only reply that it depended on the situation at the time. In other words, they have no offensive plan and treat the situation just the same as where the main German blow is on the east, when they decide on the local counter-offensive according to the situation. East Prussia is always in their mind as an objective of first importance. Report by the British delegation of the Anglo-Polish Staff Conversations, 12th June 1939. Polici suggested that Poland could not count on effective assistance from England and France. I replied that Poland primarily relies on its own strength. I do not know if we will be helped, but I do know that a war over Danzig could no longer be localized and that Germany would risk losing East Prussia. Jan Schembeck, 28 June. In general, we are of the opinion that the Poles tend to underrate the German strength and overrate their own. Report by the British delegation of the Anglo-Polish Staff Conversations, 14th July 1939. With a certain contempt, Ambassador Kennedy spoke about optimists who believed that Germany could be easily or quickly overpowered, or who speculated on a coup in Germany. John Wszelaki, 16th June. The Poles expect the war to come in the autumn. They expect to be able to take local offensives with their cavalry and motorized brigade against columns of German motorized troops, who will find themselves unable to advance due to demolition of the main roads and the inability of country roads to carry the motor vehicles in large numbers. They also have the conception of a strategic counterattack into East Prussia, which they categorically state will be the first object of their attack. Report by the British delegation of the Anglo-Polish Staff Conversations, 12th of June 1939. Danzig could be slowly strangled and exposed to economic ruin, even famine. Danzig could be occupied by Poland without difficulty from the second half of September and definitely from the beginning of October onwards. The reconquest of the corridor in Danzig by Germany would naturally follow, but major military operations would no longer be possible at that time of the year. It would no longer be possible for Germany to employ the motorized forces which are required for a deep thrust into Poland. This would reduce Danzig to ruins. In reply to Ciano's question as to what solution the Führer envisaged, the latter replied that Poland must give up Danzig politically, but that her economic interests would naturally be safeguarded. He doubted whether Poland would be prepared to do this, as hitherto Poland had rejected Germany's proposals. Record of conversation between the Führer and the Italian foreign minister, 12th and 13th August. The Polish ambassador said to me that he could see no sign of compromise in either France or England. Indeed, such a policy would be impossible to pursue because Poland, whatever attitude might be taken by France or England, would fight. William Bullitt, 16th August. The Polish ambassador called this morning. He had little to offer other than to reiterate the belief of his government that German strength was overrated. German officers had insufficient training, the best generals had been liquidated, and the remaining generals were merely party hacks. The whole conversation represented a point of view of unreasoning optimism and still more unreasoning underrating of one's opponent that, if typical of Polish mentality in general, causes me to feel considerable foreboding. Pierpont Moffat, 18th August. If the president is contemplating any action for peace, it seems to me the place to work is on Beck in Poland. Joseph Kennedy, 23rd August. The situation is serious and cannot be ignored. A clear line has been established. Below this line comes our non-possumus. This is clear. We will fight. Where is this line? It is our territory, but not only that. The line also involves the non-acceptance of unilateral suggestions to be imposed on us regarding Danzig. Germany is marching all across Europe with 9 divisions. With such strength, Poland would not be overcome. Joseph Beck, 24th March. Beck thought that the efficiency of the German army had been greatly exaggerated. Reports at the disposal of the Polish authorities confirmed this. Anthony Eden, 5th April. Beck had expressed satisfaction at the fact that our guarantee would be brought into operation by a unilateral decision of the Polish government to resist a threat to Poland's independence. Alexander Cadogan, 7th April. Beck's impression of Hitler, whom he had seen many times, was that at bottom, the Führer was a timid Austrian who would not risk war against determined and strong opponents. William Bullitt, 7th April. Beck considers the attitude which Danzig had adopted, after consulting with Berlin, is a favorable sign which should encourage us all to persevere in our joint policy of firmness. Leon Noel, 7th August. Traffic between Poland and Germany was closed on 17th August from the Polish side. All offices of the Young German Worker Party, the unions and cultural associations of German workers, have been closed. The number of arrests in Upper Silesia amounts to far over 1,000, with the obvious purpose of taking hostages. The abductions, raids, and imprisonments has led to a mass flight of Germans across the border. Archive of the Present, 19th August. Gamelin said the French had put pressure on the Poles not to take offensive action against Danzig. They had heard strong rumors that the Poles intended to attack Danzig if it declared itself a German city. Leslie Hoare-Belisha, 21st August. The Germans and Russians have announced that they propose to sign a non-aggression pact, and that Ribbentrop is on his way to Moscow for that purpose. This smashes our peace front and makes our guarantee to Poland very questionable. Harold Nicholson, 22nd August. Churchill has rung up Paul Reynaud, who asserts that all is going well, by which he means war, I suppose. Harold Nicholson, 23rd August. The German-Russian non-aggression pact is regarded here as a skillful countermove to the encirclement policy of the Western powers. Wippert von Blücher, 23rd August. According to Zaleski, the German-Russian pact is only the continuation of the bluffing policy pursued by Germany. This proves that in Berlin, there is a greater confidence in diplomatic maneuvers than in the sword. On the one hand, the pact will infuriate the National Socialist Party members, and on the other hand, the pact will please the German opinion that supports the policy of consultation and agreement. Arszewski, too, believes we are in the midst of a large-scale bluff. Jan Schembeck, 23rd August. It seems that Hitler had counted on immediate Italian military assistance and even made his actions dependent on it. The result of Mussolini's letter, received the night before last, was the cancellation of the whole operation. If the English were made aware of the orders and their retraction, as well as the Italian stance, this would be interpreted as a sign of weakness and could lead to a hardening on their part. Ulrich von Hassel, 23rd August. Poland's confidence in British and French assistance in the event of war is unshaken. The ambassadors of the 2 Western powers gave Beck assurances with regard to this again yesterday. Johann von Wülich, 24th August. At the beginning of August, a dispute arose between the Polish government and the Danzig Senate as to the position and functions of certain Polish customs officials. It was not a question of major importance. Many more acute difficulties have been easily settled in the past under less tense conditions, and even in this case, discussions had actually begun between the parties last week. While those discussions were in progress, the German press opened a violent campaign against the Polish government. They declared that Danzig could not be the subject of any conference or any compromise, and that it must come back to the Reich at once and unconditionally. They went further. They linked up with the Danzig question, the question of the corridor. They attacked the whole policy and the attitude of the Polish government, and they published circumstantial accounts of the alleged ill treatment of Germans living in Poland. There is no subject which is calculated to arouse ill feeling in any country more than statements about the ill treatment of people of their own race in another country. This is a subject which provides the most inflammable of all materials, the material most likely to cause a general conflagration. In those circumstances, one cannot but deeply regret that such incidents, which, if they were established, would naturally excite sympathy for the victims and indignation against the authors of this alleged ill treatment, should be treated in a way which is calculated still further to embitter the atmosphere and raise the temperature to the danger point. Neville Chamberlain, 24th August. The Prime Minister was dignified and calm, but without one word which could inspire anybody. He was exactly like a coroner summing up a case of murder. Harold Nicholson, 24th August. I received the Polish ambassador, who was surprised to be treated as a nuisance. The more one shows a willingness to uphold France's commitments to Poland, the less tenderness one has for people who, after all, risk costing us a war. I try to explain our psychology, to make it intelligible to this diplomat who participates in the frenzies of his people. We do like you, but we would prefer it if you were stronger and patient. Neither Daladier, Georges Bonnet, or Léon Noël has ever whispered any encouragement of war into Poland's ear, except perhaps by British association. No one here wants war. Anatole de Moncy, 24th August. Commissioner Chodaki appeared before me and implored me to take my wife by car to Berlin that night, as hostilities could begin any day. The city could be bombed, and he did not wish to take responsibility for the presence of women and children. Karl Burkhardt, 26th August. The Polish government feel compelled to complete their military measures on account of the intentions towards Poland expressed in the communication made by the German Chancellor to the British ambassador. This means putting the divisions which have not yet been mobilized onto a war footing. Leon Noel, 28th August. In a guarded telephone conversation, Kennedy indicated that the jig was up. Pierpont Moffat, 28th August. The Polish ambassador assured Spears that, far from the situation being desperate, things are going very nicely. Harold Nicholson, 29th August. I informed the British and French ambassadors that the proclamation of a state of war was not planned, and the measures that normally accompany mobilization will be limited. The two ambassadors listened with gravity. Kennard only remarked that the word mobilization would create the impression worldwide that we are going to war. Anglo-German discussions are still ongoing at this moment. London is awaiting Berlin's response. It would be extremely desirable that we do not announce mobilization before the delivery of this response. I informed Minister Beck of the reaction of the French and British ambassadors. He said that the mobilization orders cannot be rescinded, as they have already been given and apply automatically. Jan Schembeck, 29th August. I have just seen Minister Beck, to whom I strongly reproach for acting in a way that puts us in the presence of a fait accompli. I showed him the gravity of his actions. He apologized profusely but defended himself poorly. I managed to get him to make immediate contact with General Stashwitz in my presence and to ask him to delay, if possible, the posting of the mobilization orders. I was informed that they could only be delayed by a few hours. Leon Noel, 29th August. Hitler's reply to Chamberlain seems to indicate that he has gone some distance in keeping matters open for discussion. The president thinks it indicates that the Germans are scared. Adolf Burl, 30th August. Frankly, Chamberlain is more worried about getting the Poles to be reasonable than the Germans. He feels there is a great body of public opinion in England, headed probably by Eden and Churchill, who will suggest to the Poles that they give up nothing and that they have Hitler on the run. This, of course, will mean war. Joseph Kennedy, 30th August. Churchill has been telephoning daily, and this evening Lloyd George did also. Mr. Harcourt Johnstone came to see me representing the Liberal Party. All these men expressed the concern that Poland should not weaken or give in to force. Edward Rosinski, 30th August. There is no doubt that Danzig is suffering heavy losses by diminution of traffic. Every additional day of these conditions will strengthen the German argument that Danzig should be less exposed to Polish pressure and should enjoy Reich protection and assistance. Francis Shepard, 30th August. I can only urge the importance of Poland accepting the proposal for direct negotiations, and thereby putting herself right in the eyes of the world. Neville Henderson, 30th August. For my part, I believe that the Polish government should accept the appointment of a plenipotentiary. If the negotiation is to take place in Berlin, it would seem appropriate for Mr. Lipski to be in charge. Robert Coulondre, 30th August. Please communicate to Beck that a blank refusal to negotiate is likely to increase the German forces working for war and will enable Germany to place the onus of breakdown on Poland. Edward Halifax to Howard Kennard, 30th August. I asked Beck what attitude the Polish ambassador in Berlin would adopt if Ribbentrop handed him the German proposals. Beck replied that Lipski would not be authorized to accept such a document. Howard Kennard, 31st August. As a last resort, let us propose to France and Britain a conference for the 5th of September for the purpose of reviewing the Treaty of Versailles. François Poncet welcomes the proposal with some skepticism. Percy Lorraine welcomes it with enthusiasm. Halifax receives it favorably, reserving the right to submit it to Chamberlain. I insist on a quick answer since time is pressing. Not until 8:20 p.m. does the Central Telephone Office inform us that London has cut its communications with Italy. Galeazzo Ciano, 31st August. Georges Bonnet summons me and speaks about the Italian proposal. Bonnet believes he can obtain the cabinet's approval for the conference. Italian mediation is the last chance for peace. We cannot rely on a German-Polish agreement. Anatole de Monzy, 31st August. The cabinet meeting opens at 6 p.m. with a presentation by Georges Bonnet, a simple, sincere, demonstrative presentation. What he says is perfect but lacking in faith and without the vigor of assertion. He is intimidated by Daladier. No one dares counter the idea that Hitler is bluffing and that Italian mediation is a trap. Daladier speaks of the obligation we have to remain firm and not to weaken in the face of risk. At this moment, an officer of the military household enters and hands Daladier a letter that does not seem unexpected. A personal letter from our ambassador in Berlin. Daladier says, "Listen to what he writes to me." The letter is mundane, but it concludes, "Hold firm. If you hold firm, Hitler will collapse." It's all about bluffing. The one who bluffs last will have the decisive advantage. Bluff in Berlin, trap in Rome. It's all posture. Coulondre's letter silences the dissenters. Anatole de Monzy, 31st August. Dalleris, in the company of Neville Henderson and George Ogilvy Forbes, communicated the German terms to the Polish ambassador, who had replied that acceptance would be out of the question and that his government would not give way. Alexander Cadogan, 31st August. The Polish ambassador said he would stake his reputation on his conviction that German morale was breaking and that the present regime would soon crack. He said this offer was a sign of weakness on the part of the Germans. Neville Henderson, 31st August. We listened to the 11 o'clock news and had heard the 16-point German proposal read out without commentary. I was horrified. I was even more horrified because Diana, upon hearing them, said that they did not seem unreasonable to her. I tried to explain how they meant the end of Poland, but I felt that the reactions of millions of people might well be the same as that of my wife. I rang up Churchill, who said he felt exactly as I did, but he had already spoken with the Daily Mail, who were inclined to take a favorable view of the German proposals. I then urged the Daily Telegraph to come out with a strong article condemning the proposals. Duff Cooper, 31st August. The German government will declare war in view of Polish general mobilization and their conviction that Poland prefers to fight rather than negotiate. Neville Henderson, 31st August. Georges Bonnet informs me over the phone that German troops have entered Poland. This time they are crossing the limits of bluff. I hope we will no longer support the policy of firmness in the face of bluffing. I notice a resentment of Poland in several quarters. Someone recalled to me that last year Poland refused to assist Czechoslovakia and took advantage of the turmoil to annex Teschen. The president reacted in the same way. No one understands Beck's warlike intentions. We are 12 months behind our understanding of Polish mentality. However, I said to my neighbor in the cabinet, Paul Renault, "We will fight for Poland if Mussolini fails to organize a conference." He alone smiled. Many of my government colleagues agreed on turning to Italy. The obstacle to peace now is not Rome, but London. Anatole de Monzy, 1st September. The Polish ambassador can no longer contain his impatience. His country has been preparing for war ever since Beck received guarantees from the British, which also seemed to imply the support of France. He accuses us of cunning and reproaches us for evading. He almost insulted Bonnet. Anatole de Monzy, 2nd September. I was awakened by a phone call from Lukasiewicz, who said the situation in France was confused. Paris was full of rumors about a peace initiative by Mussolini, and not a word was heard about a declaration of war on Germany. At 9:30, he telephoned again in a state of even greater anxiety, beseeching me to bring about some decisive action by the British government, which the French would be bound to follow. In the evening, Churchill rang me up. I told him that Britain and France had still not made up their minds, he said slowly and in a strangled voice. I hope that Britain will keep its... And could go no further. His voice was stuck in his throat. I was startled to hear him sob. At which point Anthony Eden took over the telephone and said in the most sympathetic tone that he and his friends were impatient for the war. At 10 p.m., I again called on Halifax to ask him when the British were going to declare war and whether, if necessary, they would do so without France. His reply was somewhat more reassuring. Edward Rosinski, 2nd of September. The French, led by Georges Bonnet, would not shorten their ultimatum to Germany, which they insisted should be for a whole week. We know we could not hold the House of Commons for so long, but we offered as a compromise 48 hours from tomorrow morning. The French at first would not agree. Here the war party, suddenly strengthened by John Simon, who I suppose saw his chance of becoming prime minister, began to argue for a shorter ultimatum still. Terrific excitement, wild talk of the French ratting all together, of our fighting them and the whole world. I saw Alec Dunglass. Are we all mad? I asked. Henry Channon, 2nd September. Corbyn telephoned me at 2 o'clock in the morning. The British had done their best to reconcile their point of view with ours, but they could not hold off until Sunday noon, because Parliament would sit at 10 a.m. If Chamberlain had not sent his ultimatum to Germany by then, his government would be overthrown, so the ultimatum would be delivered at 9 a.m. and hostilities would begin at 11 a.m. Georges Bonnet, 3rd September. The British government have, an occurrence unique in history, given the Polish state full powers for all actions against Germany, which that state might conceivably intend to undertake. The British government assured the Polish government of their full military support in all circumstances, should Germany defend herself against any provocation or attack. The German government does not intend to tolerate conditions, guaranteed by British obligations, which are similar to the conditions we observe in Palestine. Above all, the German people do not intend to allow themselves to be ill-treated by Poles. Note from the German government to the British government, 3rd September. The House of Commons was crowded. The opposition, who yesterday growled at the Prime Minister for not declaring war, today were too churlish to cheer him for having done so. I was indignant with the opposition. Josh Wedgwood was disgustingly jubilant. Duff Cooper grinned. Anthony Eden was expressionless. I looked up to the ambassadors' gallery, and there in a distinguished huddle was the Duke of Alba, Joseph Kennedy, and the Belgian, sitting with the French and Polish ambassadors, who both looked worn out. A little later, Mayski dared to appear, and he beamed his Cheshire cat smile. No wonder. It is the moment he has long intrigued and hoped for. Henry Channon, 3rd September. I asked Halifax how he felt about the whole thing. He said his feeling reminded him of a dream he once had in which he was being tried for murder. When he was finally convicted and found guilty, he was surprised at the feeling of relief that came over him. Now it was very much the same. Joseph Kennedy, 4th September. My final impression of the events in the last week of peace is as follows. Hitler and Ribbentrop wanted war with Poland and consciously took the risk of war with the Western powers, clinging to a belief that they would remain neutral. The Poles, with typical Polish arrogance and complacency, and entrusting Britain and France, missed every chance to avoid war. The British government, whose ambassador did everything in his power to save the peace, gave up the race in the final days, adopting a devil-may-care attitude. France hesitated much more than the British. Mussolini made every effort to avoid war. His mediation attempt could not succeed as the British could no longer save face, or even wanted to. Ulrich von Hassel, 10th September. It still seems that the détente might have been achieved had it not been for the actions of the Polish government in sending what amounted to an ultimatum on the night of August 4th. Francis Shepard, 4th September. Minister Arciszewski said that everything was lost. The recklessness of our military, domestic, economic, and foreign policies are to blame. The army should never have been allowed to go to war, given its insufficient, or rather, complete lack of preparation. Jan Schembeck, 8th September. Pavel Starzensky and I discussed our foreign policy and looked for mistakes that could have caused the current disaster. The conclusion was that the assessment of our military strength was incorrect. We were conducting power politics when we were not a power. Jan Schembeck, 15th September. I thought I had 100 divisions, when I had nothing. Josef Beck, 17th September. President Moshicki, during his trip through Bucharest after Poland's defeat, was asked by a Romanian prelate why he had thrust aside the hand extended by Germany. He answered that his government had considered very seriously the advisability of acting upon Göring's suggestions, but that it was prevented from doing so by British military and diplomatic representatives, who were backed by their American colleagues. A prompt forcing of the Scandinavian Straits by a British armada and a landing somewhere on Polish territory of French and British troops was promised. Mikkel Sturza. Beck pursued a policy in which the armaments, the economic resources, and the internal strength of the state was not up to the task. Beck had miscalculated. I recall that when he decided to go to war in case of a unilateral German decision in Danzig, he gathered the highest authorities of the ministry and informed us about it. Before the Castle Conference, where he informed the President, Prime Minister Kwiatkowski and Marshal Ridge-Smigli of this decision, he had asked the Marshal if it was possible to pursue such a policy, who would have had to express an opinion to say that it was possible. If Beck did not believe in the strength of our army, he would not have made this decision. I remember a conversation with General Litwinowicz in June, in which he talked about various weaknesses of the German army. Undoubtedly, Minister Beck received such information from military circles, as he was constantly conferring with General Stachiewicz. Jan Schembeck, 11th October. We could not have imagined that England and France would start a war and then not come to our aid. Their interest in two fronts against Germany seemed indisputable. Stanisław Zabieło. Churchill began his speech by saying how strange it was for him after 25 years to find himself once more in the same room in front of the same maps, fighting the same enemy and dealing with the same problems. His face then creases into an enormous grin, and he adds, glancing at the Prime Minister, I have no idea how this curious change in my fortunes occurred. The whole house roared with laughter. Harold Nicholson, 26 September.
Dla uczczenia rocznicy zawarcia polsko-niemieckiego paktu o nieagresji przybył do Warszawy z oficjalną wizytą minister spraw zagranicznych Rzeszy Niemieckiej, jego ekscelencja Joachim von Ribbentrop. Na placu marszałka Piłsudskiego u grobu nieznanego żołnierza następuje uroczystość złożenia wieńców. Historyczne dzieło wielkiego marszałka i wodza Rzeszy otwarło nową erę w stosunkach polsko-niemieckich.
If a Ukrainian state were to come into existence with German assistance, even should the assistance be of a military nature, under the skillful slogan freely circulated by Germany, self-determination for the Ukrainians, liberation of Ukraine from the oppression of Russia, this would be accepted by authoritative circles as well as by the British public, especially if British economic interests in the development of Ukraine were added as an incentive for the British. Britain would never allow a conflict to arise over the realization of the right to self-determination. In certain circles, the idea is also prevalent that a German expansionist policy towards Ukraine would be welcomed by many who are not well disposed towards Germany. It is thought that in this way, Germany's attention would be diverted from Western Europe for a long time to come. Herbert von Dirksen, 4th January, 1939. There might conceivably be a settlement by which Danzig would be brought into the German political community in accordance with the will of its population. Naturally, the Polish interests, especially in the economic area, would have to be fully protected. So he, the Führer, was thinking of a formula by which Danzig would come into the German community politically, but remain with Poland economically. Danzig is German, will always remain German, and will sooner or later become part of Germany. Record of German-Polish conversations, 5th January. The talks in Berchtesgaden and Munich proved useful in determining Berlin's policy after the Czech crisis. They demonstrated Germany's unwavering intent to maintain good relations with Poland. I found that the rumors of Hitler's intentions in Eastern Europe to be an exaggeration. German Eastern policy remains extremely anti-Russian. Colonial pursuits are at the forefront of Hitler's attention. Josef Beck to all diplomatic missions abroad, 10th January. On the 26th of January, Mr. Ribbentrop will arrive in Warsaw. Gazeta Polska warmly welcomes him already. This is a sign of the peacefulness of both states. 26 January marks the 5th anniversary of the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact. Therefore, Mr. Ribbentrop's visit will have symbolic significance. We want peace with the Reich, cries Gazeta Polska, but merely crying out is not enough. The French press points out that Mr. Litvinov's visit has been cancelled whilst Mr. Ribbentrop's visit is taking place instead. We smile upon this fact. Ribbentrop, not Litvinov. Voice of the Nation, 19th January. It must be remembered under what conditions Mr. Ribbentrop's visit is taking place. For several months now, the entire Western press has been predicting a violent crisis, even war in Eastern Europe. It is easy to understand these rumors and alarms, dictated not by a concern for the peace of Europe, but rather by a desire for the crisis to break out in the East rather than in the West. Illustrated Daily Courier, 26 January. The official Gazeta Polska takes particular care to stress that the Polish-French alliance is in no way a factor limiting the basic principle of Polish foreign policy, which is an independent policy reckoning only with the interests of the Polish state. This sentence is important. In political quarters, it is considered an official reply to the German comments calling the Polish situation complicated due to the existence of at least an official Polish-French military alliance. Manchester Guardian, 26 January. At a press conference today, Mr. Beck stated that the principle of Polish foreign policy is the maintenance of good relations with its neighbors. Poland's balance between Russia and Germany is a natural element that stems from the conviction that Poland wishes to avoid any cooperation that intends aggression against these two neighbors. Archive of the Present, 26 January. At a reception for Minister Ribbentrop, Mr. Beck said, "Your visit to Warsaw falls on the anniversary of the friendly declaration of peace signed between us on 26 January 1934. It is one of the shortest and simplest international agreements ever concluded. These few lines are an expression of the courage, the foresight and will of Chancellor Adolf Hitler and Marshal Joseph Pilsudski. Neither the smallest concerns or the greatest tensions of European politics could shake the principles that were formulated by the leaders of our two nations. The fact that we, Mr. Reich Minister, negotiate with you on the same foundation is something that other governments can only envy." Mr. Ribbentrop responded, "Please accept my sincerest thanks for your greeting and kind words. It is an honor and pleasure for me to be a guest of the Polish government in this beautiful city. It is essential to German foreign policy that the friendly relations between Poland and Germany deepen and solidify on the basis of our agreement. In this sense, I raise my glass to the well-being of the Polish nation and the honor of its president, Ignacy Mościcki." Archive of the Present, 27 January. Future generations can look upon these past 6 years as a historic miracle for the German community in Poland. You can be assured that the agreement of 1934 marked a final end to the hostility between our two nations. Joachim von Ribbentrop, 27 January. During his stay in the Polish capital, the Reich foreign minister had the opportunity to engage in extensive discussions with the leading statesmen of Poland. Yesterday, the Reich foreign minister had a detailed conversation with Foreign Minister Beck regarding all questions that concern both nations. The discussions were conducted in an atmosphere of sincerity and openness on the basis of the 1934 agreement and resulted in an agreement that current and future issues should be examined and resolved, protecting the legitimate interests of both nations. The discussions again demonstrate that cooperation between Germany and Poland has not only stood the test of time, but has also matured and represents a valuable contribution to the satisfaction of Europe. German Communique, 27 January. The extreme restraint that the Germans have shown regarding the Danzig question, which remains a personal matter to Mr. Beck, and the most vulnerable point of his policy, appears symptomatic of the concern in Berlin to accommodate the situation of the Polish minister. Public opinion in Poland is far from ready to consider the concessions and renunciations that Germany may expect from this country. However, Hitler undoubtedly believes that on this front, time is likely to work in his favor. He is obviously concerned about doing anything that could compromise his efforts. Leon Noel, 2nd February. It might be said that the general idea of a German-Polish understanding was mutually accepted. Prentice Gilbert, 3rd February. The Polish ambassador informed me that Germany and Poland had agreed on all of their relationships, so that there could be no occasion for friction at an early date. Cordell Hull, 7th February. Private advice has come to attention of the president. The rumor is that Hitler will move west instead of east. Hull agreed with the president's views of the serious consequences that would flow to this country should Hitler decide to march west instead of east. Harold Ickes, 29th January. I regret to report that I found Beck to be extremely evasive this morning. He told me that there was no change in the good relations between Poland and Germany. Beck had received assurances that Germany had no intention of springing any surprises on Poland, and the rumors about German activity in the Ukraine were grossly exaggerated. Howard Kennard, 11th January. We have evidence from a secret but reliable source that Hitler tried to convince Beck that German and Italian policy was now directed to the West and to colonial problems. This story has now got into the press. See attached cuttings from Sunday Times, News Chronicle, Manchester Guardian, and Daily Telegraph. If there is any truth in all this, it is comprehensible why Beck should have been so reticent with Sir Kennard and his French colleague. Germany cannot conduct war on two fronts in present circumstances, and material conditions will make it easier for her to operate in the West than in the East. William Strang, 17th January. Chamberlain is an astonishing and perplexing old boy. This afternoon he startled the House and the world by proclaiming something like an offensive and defensive alliance between us and France. This is the very thing that all of us have been pushing for, and the old boy gets up and does it as if it were the simplest thing on earth. The House was absolutely astounded. It could not have been more definite. This is a complete negation of his appeasement policy. He has in fact swung suddenly round. I think it can only mean that he realizes that appeasement has failed. Harold Nicholson, 7th February. The efforts of the anti-Chamberlainists in future may have to be directed into preventing him from plunging us into an unnecessary war. Harold Nicholson, 9th February. In light of the rapid German successes achieved through pressure, there has begun to be a concern that Poland might compromise with Germany, which would allow the latter to quickly undermine Russia. Edward Rasinski, 29th March. Mr. Corbyn said that the French position was inclined to feel that the League of Nations High Commissioner should be withdrawn from Danzig. I said we had also been disposed to think on these lines, but that there was also to be remembered the undesirable effect of causing annoyance to Mr. Beck and the Polish government on an issue of which perhaps in no circumstances could we securely count on being able to influence the outcome, when we might in certain circumstances want Mr. Beck's assistance in a much graver situation. Edward Halifax, 5th January. Ribbentrop's visit to Warsaw in January 1939 had given the unfortunate impression to the Western states that a German-Polish agreement was within reach. Karl Burkhardt. If someone known for their isolationist sentiments had been president, the case for allowing Hitler to move east would have been much stronger in London and Paris. Herbert Hoover visited Chamberlain in March 1938 and suggested that it would be much better if Germany moved east rather than west. It would be a disaster for civilization if the Western democracies were dragged down by a war, the result of which would only be the saving of Russian despotism. Chamberlain agreed and said that these thoughts dominated his policy. William Henry Chamberlain. Played golf with Joseph Kennedy today. Roosevelt's ambassador to Britain in the years immediately before the war. I asked him about his conversations with Roosevelt and Neville Chamberlain from 1938 onwards. He said Chamberlain's position in 1938 was that England had nothing with which to fight and that she could not risk going to war with Hitler. In Kennedy's view, Hitler would have fought Russia without any later conflict with England if it had not been for Bullitt's urging on Roosevelt in the summer of 1939 that the Germans must be face down about Poland. Neither the French nor the British would have made Poland a case for war if it had not been for the constant needling from Washington. Bullitt kept telling Roosevelt that the Germans wouldn't fight, Kennedy that they would, and that they would overrun Europe. Chamberlain, he says, stated that America had forced England into the war. In his telephone conversation with Roosevelt in the summer of 1939, the president kept telling him to put some iron up Chamberlain's backside. Kennedy's response was that putting iron up his backside did no good unless the British had some iron with which to fight with, and they did not. What Kennedy told me in this conversation agrees substantially with the remarks Clarence Dillon had made to me already, to the general effect that Roosevelt had asked him in some manner to communicate privately with the British to the end that Chamberlain should have greater firmness in his dealings with Germany. Dillon told me that at Roosevelt's request he had talked with Lord Lothian in the same general sense as Kennedy reported Roosevelt having urged him to do with Chamberlain. James Forrestal, 27th of December, 1945. The fear is that as things are going, France may be a helpless country lying between an enlarged Germany and strengthened Italy. Britain might even be reduced to the status of a third-rate power, with many of her colonies gone. If this should happen, there might then follow attempts by Germany, Italy, and Japan to penetrate South America. This would mean that the United States would have to go to the defense of South America, in which event we would be called upon to defend both the Atlantic and the Pacific seaboards from powerful enemies. In the event of war, the president thinks that the British and French will control not only the Atlantic, but also the Mediterranean. This would mean both Germany and Italy would be bottled up. The president discussed again at cabinet his idea of a strictly defensive war. He indicated that even if we had to enforce our neutrality laws, there would be methods for which munitions could flow towards Britain and France. Harold Ickes, 24 September, 1938. The president felt that if war came, the French would speedily mop up the Italian colonies in Africa and would promptly liquidate Franco in Spain. He believes that Italy itself could be driven to the wall and that then England, France, Russia, Czechia, Romania, Yugoslavia, Turkey, and other anti-German countries could concentrate against Germany. Harold Ickes, 30th of September. The president said he expects the following moves in the future. Germany will be wanting colonies, and in the process of satisfying the German appetite, it is suspected that England will offer Trinidad and prevail upon France to offer Martinique. This would give Germany strong outposts on our eastern coast as well as the coasts of South America. Then the United States would be urged to agree to these transfers. The president has made up his mind that if any such a thing should happen, the United States fleet would be sent to take both of these islands. Harold Ickes, 9th October. I asked Ambassador Bullitt how he visualized the future war. He replied that above all, the United States, France, and England must rearm tremendously. Only then, when the moment is ripe, will they be ready for the final decision. I asked him in what way could the conflict arise, since Germany probably would not attack England and France. Bullitt replied that the democratic countries needed another 2 years until they were fully armed. In the meantime, Germany would have advanced with its expansion in an easterly direction. It would be the wish of the democratic states that armed conflict would break out there, between Germany and Russia. In reply to my question whether the United States would take part in such war, he said, "Undoubtedly yes, but only after Britain and France had made the first move." Jerzy Potocki, 21st November. I was visited by the American ambassador in Warsaw, Anthony Biddle. He told me with a strange satisfaction that the Poles were ready to go to war over Danzig. They would meet the motorized forces of the German army with agility. In April, he declared, the new crisis will break out. Never since the torpedoing of the Lusitania has there been such religious hatred against Germany and America. Chamberlain and Daladier will be swept away by public opinion. It is a holy war. Karl Burkhardt, 2nd December. Words may be futile, but war is not the only means of commanding a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. There are many methods short of war, but stronger and more effective than mere words, of bringing home to aggressor governments the aggregate sentiments of our own people. At the very least, we can and should avoid any action or any lack of action which will encourage, assist, or build up an aggressor. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 4th January, 1939. Beck, voicing his and his government colleagues' opinion, was profoundly impressed by the president's speech. Anthony Biddle, 10th January. According to Ambassador Biddle, England would look favorably upon Germany engaging Russia. In competent British circles, it is calculated that in a showdown between Germany and Russia, Hitler would be forced to launch 100 divisions to the east. The West could take advantage of this to attack Germany from behind. Jan Schembeck, 6th January. Bullitt leaves for Paris on the 21st of this month. He is sailing with a trunk full of instructions and directions from President Roosevelt, the State Department, and senators of the Foreign Affairs Committee. In talking to Bullitt, I had the impression that he had received from President Roosevelt a very detailed definition of the attitude taken by the United States towards the present European crisis. Bullitt explained to me, "It is the decided opinion of Roosevelt that France and Britain must put an end to any sort of compromise with the totalitarian countries. They must not let themselves in for any discussions aiming at any kind of territorial changes. They have the assurance that the United States will leave the policy of isolation and be prepared to intervene actively on the side of Britain and France in case of war. America is ready to place its whole wealth of money and raw materials at their disposal. The United States' preparation for war on sea, land, and air, which will be carried out at an accelerated speed, will consume the colossal sum of $1.2 billion. Jerzy Potocki, 16th January. At Cabinet, the President pointed out that Hitler would not have to control all of Europe and South America in order to make it difficult for us economically. For example, if Hitler can dominate the major part of Europe, he can bring pressure upon Argentina to conform with fascist principles and economics. Harold Ickes, 29th January. The President told Lord Lothian frankly that, while he was willing to help all he could, he would do nothing if Britain cringed like a coward. The President thinks that the British are suffering an inferiority complex. The wealthy class in England is so afraid of communism that they have thrown themselves into the arms of Germany, and now they don't know which way to turn. Harold Ickes, 29th January. On January 31st, 1939, at a secret conference with the Senate Military Affairs Committee, President Roosevelt told the senators that he was working closely with Britain and France, and that he meant his statement of action more effective than mere words. The United States must get into the fight against the dictators. Herbert Hoover, 31st President of the United States. At a press conference at the White House this morning, the President described deliberate lies about statements attributed to him regarding the American border located on the Rhine. To a journalist who asked him to clearly define what American foreign policy was, Roosevelt stated that he was in complete sympathy with all efforts made to reduce or limit armaments. Mr. Roosevelt, who seemed irritated, then accused the American press of distorting the facts, adding that questions of national policy should not be the subject of controversies engaged for electoral purposes. Finally, he insisted that secrecy should be maintained regarding the conversations he had had with members of Congress. They had been convened in committee to be informed of strictly confidential information. If this information were published, it would be contrary to the interests of the United States. These statements, which were intended to dispel misunderstandings, seem to have done the opposite. René Doinel de Saint-Quentin, 3rd February. Ambassador Bullitt said, "Should war break out, likely we shall not take part in it at the beginning, but we shall finish it." According to Ambassador Bullitt, the above-mentioned attitude of official Washington circles is not based on ideological motives, but stems entirely from the necessity of defending the realistic interests of the United States. The United States has at its disposal many different and powerful means of pressure, and the threat to employ them would suffice to hold Britain back from a policy of compromise. Juliusz Lukasiewicz, 5th February. It is these circles which are striving to reinforce America's willingness to participate, by arguing that Germany is not economically in a position to wage a protracted war and would collapse within a few months from lack of raw materials, and that therefore the time to strike is now or never. Hans Thomson, 27th March. On the birthday of George Washington at the American Club in Paris, Ambassador Bullitt and Prime Minister Daladier gave speeches. Bullitt referred to American rearmament, which had become necessary because the Atlantic no longer provided America with complete security as it did during the time of George Washington. Daladier noted that there was no need for formal agreements and promises between France and the United States, for the two states were connected by freedom and justice. Archive of the Present, 22nd February. We had a meeting in Halifax office to discuss our position. It was agreed we must make no empty threats, since we were not going to fight for Czechoslovakia any more than for Danzig, although we would fight for Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, or Tunisia. Oliver Harvey, 14th March. I told the French ambassador that the one compensating advantage I saw in the German occupation of Prague was that it had brought a natural end to the somewhat embarrassing commitment of a guarantee in which the French had been involved. Edward Halifax, 15th March. The situation has radically changed since the Slovak Diet declared the independence of Slovakia. This decision has put an end to the internal disruption by the state whose frontiers we had proposed to guarantee. His Majesty's government cannot accordingly hold themselves any longer bound by this obligation. Neville Chamberlain, 15th March. It seems interesting to me that the news has generally been met with resignation. It is significant to note that the stock exchange, which is usually so sensitive to external threats, did not react with any panic to the German takeover of Czechia. Everyone recognizes that this is a direct consequence of the Munich Agreement, which, by confirming the disinterest of the Western powers in Central Europe, had placed the Czech state at the mercy of the Reich. Charles Corbin, 15th March. We ought perhaps to take a stand, whatever that may mean, but after the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, can we? He is speaking again tomorrow at Birmingham. Think he's been binged up to be a bit firmer. Alexander Cadogan, 16th March. The current view of the State Department is that the German drive to the east continues substantially unchecked. We talked with the President at the White House. He believes that the Germans will go eastward, that they will not make any agreement with Stalin. Summer Wells raised the question of our relations in South America. We agreed that if we did nothing, German prestige would probably rise there. The main point in all this is that the State Department is rapidly reaching the boiling point. I gather the President feels the same way about it. At all events, Bullitt had been telephoning him during the day. Adolf Berl, 16th March. Mr. Roosevelt's foreign policy will become firmer than ever as a result of the seizure of Czechoslovakia. It was declared in circles in close contact with the President today. The result that a policy of stiffening what is regarded as the flabby resolution of the European democracies is likely to be intensified. Daily Record and Mail, 17th March. It is a straight question of whether you can appeal to a moral principle in governing the world, or whether we have to be guided by a straight Machiavellian policy. Whatever we do, we shall have to go alone. Neither France nor Britain can be trusted. They are frightened and unfrank. This is particularly true of the British government. Any move we make will be the first in a constant, irritating policy, which will lead to a modified state of war. Adolf Berl, 17th March. Bullitt told me of a conversation he had with the President 2 days before Chamberlain's speech. Roosevelt said on the telephone, "I have the evening papers in front of me with their headlines. Chamberlain washes his hands. You know the last well-known man about whom that was said?" "Yes," replied Bullitt. "Pontius Pilate said it of himself." Roosevelt was burning with rage against the Germans and also against Chamberlain. Joseph Kennedy, 17th March. What is remarkable is the promptness with which the government deemed the time had come to take extreme measures and proceeded to such a brutal reversal of British foreign policy. It was even within 48 hours, exactly between the 15th and 17th of March, that the reversal in question occurred. Charles Corbin, 4th April. The reason for the British about-turn was because Chamberlain had received a message from Roosevelt. The President warned that Britain could expect no support from the United States if the Munich policy continued. In effect, Roosevelt bluntly asked whether Britain was a National Socialist nation or a democracy, and warned that the United States would watch Chamberlain's future policy for the answer. Following Munich, the Roosevelt administration instructed Ambassador Kennedy to suggest to Chamberlain that the only thing Hitler understood was force, and that it would be an excellent idea to call an abrupt end to appeasement. Supposedly, Chamberlain agreed, whereupon the State Department developed a program carefully calculated to show Hitler that he could give the democracies no more lip. To this end, the United States deliberately recalled its ambassador from Berlin and planned that Secretary X should scold the Germans and that Secretary Wells, in turn, should scold the German Deputy Ambassador, Hans Thomson. Furthermore, American soundings taken in Europe all showed that this strategy was having an excellent effect, that Hitler and Mussolini were both worried. But the State Department discovered that British bankers and members of the British cabinet would go around to the Germans and tell them that Britain was not in sympathy with these U.S. statements. Even more startling, it was discovered that British banks were loaning money outright to Germany. Finally, it was discovered that the Federation of British Industries worked out a secret trade agreement with the Germans, undercutting the United States and the Anglo-American trade agreement so laboriously negotiated by Cordell Hull. Washington Times-Herald, 14th April. I feel bound to repeat that, while I am not prepared to engage this country by new unspecified commitments operating under conditions which cannot now be foreseen, yet no greater mistake could be made than to suppose that, because it believes war to be a senseless and cruel thing, this nation has so lost its fiber that it will not take part to the utmost of its power in resisting such a challenge if it ever were made. Neville Chamberlain, 17th March. Halifax asked me what I thought of Chamberlain's speech. I said I didn't see how Britain could expect to have any world standing if they permitted Hitler to move into Romania, and England did nothing after Chamberlain's speech last night. I thought the United States felt that way also, even though I was dead set against the United States getting into war. Halifax asked, under no circumstances? I said possibly, but not until it was definitely for our own selfish reasons. Halifax said he agreed and would inform the Prime Minister of my opinion. Joseph Kennedy, 18th March. It is assured that it was only under the persistent pressure of Halifax that Chamberlain agreed to include in his Birmingham speech the phrases that immediately gave the impression that he had drawn the appropriate lesson from events. Charles Corbin, 4th April. Any attempt to compromise with Japan would alienate the sympathy of the United States. I consider that our aim must be active Anglo-American cooperation, wherever possible. Edward Halifax, 18th January. Despite Halifax's pressure, the government still seemed hesitant, and Your Excellency knows how insufficient and vague the initial proposals for international collaboration developed at Downing Street were. Charles Corbin, 4th April. The fact is that the belligerent party in Washington is making headway. Adolf Burl, 22nd March. The president told an interesting story about a telephone conversation with Bullitt. It seems that Bullitt called him from Paris and began by saying, "Mr. President, of course the English Foreign Office is listening into this conversation, and we will have to be careful what we say. You and I know that they are a bunch of cowardly, double-crossing, tricky people over there who can't be relied upon to carry out their own undertakings. And undoubtedly the French are listening in too. But you know they are just as bad as the English." The president said he concluded the conversation by saying, "Well, Bill, I agree with you in everything you have said." The president was delighted with this episode, offering, as it did, an opportunity to tell the British and French unofficially what we thought of them. Harold Ickes, 22nd March. Halifax definitely wants to lay down a line and say to Hitler, "If you step over that line, it is war." I think all of this is background, and we will get no definite moves until we see what assurances Beck can give the British that will satisfy them that Poland will fight. Joseph Kennedy, 24th March. It has become apparent that the British diplomatic offensive has come to a complete halt. Poland declined to ally with Russia. Holland and Switzerland expressed displeasure at rumors that France and England planned to guarantee their integrity, etc. As someone remarked, Hitler has had 3 victories within a week. First in Czechoslovakia, second in Memel, and third in London. I am rapidly lowering my estimate of the cleverness of British diplomacy. According to Russian reports, The spine which Chamberlain showed in his Birmingham speech is not being followed by action, and the outlook for a positive British policy is as questionable as it was a couple months ago. Pierpont Moffat, 24th March. I am of the opinion that the Polish government will seek to avoid the possibility of finding itself out on a limb in terms of commitments, not only to the Axis powers but also to the Western powers. In the immediate future, I expect Beck to pursue an I'm from Missouri policy vis-a-vis the Western European powers. Anthony Biddle, 3rd March. We have the impression here more and more that Biddle, the American ambassador, exercises an unfavorable influence on Polish policy. Biddle has the ear of Beck to a considerable extent and is a tool of Bullitt, the well-known American ambassador in Paris, who is causing quite enough harm in any case. Johann von Bullish, 21st March. During a conversation with Ambassador Bullitt on the 24th of March, I stated that all diplomatic negotiations started by London would have no possibility of success so long as the British government decides not to accept definite and precise obligations. It is childish and criminal to hold Poland responsible for war or peace. It must be asserted once and for all that the responsibility rests principally with England and France. Ambassador Bullitt agreed completely with my views. The following day, the 25th, he informed me that, adopting my views and exercising the authority he was accorded, he had instructed the American ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, to call at the residence of Prime Minister Chamberlain and to repeat everything to him, emphasizing categorically the responsibility of the British government. In order to strengthen the efforts of the American ambassador in London, I called the attention of Ambassador Bullitt to the fact that it is possible that the British may treat the efforts of the United States with contempt. He answered that I am probably right, but that nevertheless the United States has at its disposal the means to bring pressure on England. Juliusz Lukasiewicz, 29th March. If Poland rejects the British offer of an alliance, as seems possible, all resistance to Germany would cease in the eastward of French boundaries. The strength which Hitler and Mussolini could bring against the French army, after a few months of organizing Central and Eastern Europe, would be such that the temptation of France and England to submit to Germany would be colossal. If they submit, South America would be next on the Hitler program. William Bullitt to President Roosevelt, 24th March. I asked Kennedy about the conversation which he is said to have had recently with Mr. Chamberlain concerning Poland. Kennedy was surprised and declared categorically that a conversation of such significance never took place. At the same time, and contradicting his own assertion, Kennedy expressed displeasure and surprise that his colleagues in Paris and Warsaw should talk so openly about this conversation. Edward Rosinsky, 29th March. It was difficult for me to judge what effect the conversation with Mr. Kennedy could have had on the position of Mr. Chamberlain, but I believe that it was not without meaning, since from what Bullitt told me, the British government was very much concerned with the American opinion and wished to maintain close relations with Washington. I was very pleased that Ambassador Kennedy's conversation with Chamberlain had led the latter to adopt a surprisingly firm stand on Danzig. Juliusz Lukasiewicz, 29th March. The Prime Minister suggested that it might be convenient to examine the second report of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, the conclusions of which can be found in paragraph 22. Quote, "If we are compelled to enter such a war in the near future, we would be confronted with a position more serious than the Empire has ever faced before. The ultimate outcome of the conflict might well depend upon the intervention of other powers, in particular the United States of America." Cabinet meeting, 26 January. There are rumors here to the effect that Ambassador Kennedy actually did talk with Mr. Chamberlain in recent days. It is asserted that he emphasized that America's sympathies for England in case of a conflict would depend to a great extent upon the determination with which England would take care of European states threatened by Germany. Edward Rosinsky, 29th March. The Foreign Secretary said we were faced with the dilemma of doing nothing or entering into a devastating war. If we did nothing, this would mean a great accession to Germany's strength and a great loss to ourselves of sympathy and support in the United States. If we had to choose between two great evils, he favored our going to war. Cabinet meeting, 27th March. Ambassador Rosinsky said that if Germany had made a reasonable proposal over Danzig, Poland would probably have accepted it. He has in mind that 4 years ago, the British urged Poland strongly to give Danzig to Germany, and even now, he is distrustful of Britain's desire to fight from the intimations he gets that Poland should perhaps make a deal with the Germans about Danzig. He said, however, that if Germany tries to take Danzig by a coup or make a proposal that means union with the Reich, Poland would fight. Beck hopes to get the assistance of England and France, but he is definitely urging the Polish people to be ready to fight, whether they have assurances from England and France or not. Joseph Kennedy, 28 March. The British have devised a new plan which would be based on British and French guarantees to Poland that they would immediately go to her assistance in case of an unprovoked attack by Germany. These guarantees, however, are to be contingent upon a similar guarantee being given by Poland to Romania. The British hope to have the details worked out and accepted by Poland before Beck visits London next week. Joseph Kennedy, 28 March. The Polish ambassador said that Poland, provided Britain was prepared to fight, would enter a full defensive alliance with Britain, similar to the Franco-Polish Alliance. If Beck should leave Warsaw for London, that would be the signal that it had been possible to agree to make such an alliance. Beck would certainly not leave Warsaw for London unless and until all difficulties had been eliminated and the signature of the Anglo-Polish Alliance was in prospect. William Bullitt, 29 March. The Foreign Secretary said Ambassador Kennedy had received a message yesterday from Biddle, the American ambassador in Warsaw, to the effect that the Memel episode was giving credit to Ribbentrop, who was anxious to pull off another coup while this country and France were still discussing what action they should take, pointing out that Britain and France would fail to support Poland and that this failure would alienate American opinion from France and Britain. Cabinet meeting, 30th March. The Prime Minister said the declaration, which had been made on the 31st of March, had been made to prevent Britain and Poland from being taken by surprise by some sudden coup. Record of Anglo-Polish conversations held in London, 4th April. This momentous act was performed with courage and a remarkable sense of timing. It is not certain who was responsible for it, but probably it was Halifax. In particular, I do not know how the British government learnt that the moment was ripe for such a guarantee. At all events, it was not us who told them. Edward Rasinski, 13th August. According to Pataki, the atmosphere prevailing in Poland by comparison to the war psychosis in the West is one that makes our country look like a retirement home. For example, while he was sailing from America to Europe, there had been the rumor that a coup had taken place in Danzig. In America, there are all kinds of elements clearly pushing for war. The press, the big capitalists, the arms industry. They all found an excellent situation, a tension spot in Danzig, and a nation that wants to fight, Poland. They want to do business at our expense. The destruction of our country would be meaningless to them. On the contrary, they could only profit from it. Jens Schembeck, 6 July. It is important to emphasize that the unrest reported in Danzig has been considerably exaggerated by the concerns of interested propaganda and never exhibited the character of organized preparation of violent action. Leon Noel, 10th July. This inflammatory campaign reached its peak in the early days of July, when United Press reports from Warsaw regarding a Danzig Polish crisis, German ultimatums, etc., provoked a regular feeling of panic and crisis in London. The embassy soon traced the crisis mongers. They were American circles working through the American embassy in Warsaw. This was the first but a very distinct sign that Roosevelt was interested in an aggravation of the situation, or in war, in order to secure first the repeal of the neutrality law and then his re-election thanks to the war. These intrigues and crises had a direct effect, inasmuch as they compelled Chamberlain to declare, in ever more precise terms, that any change in the status quo in Danzig would constitute a casus foederis for Britain. Herbert von Dirksen, German ambassador to Britain. We have guaranteed to give our assistance to Poland in the case of a clear threat to her independence, which she considers it vital to resist with her national forces, and we are firmly resolved to carry out this undertaking. Neville Chamberlain, 10th July. Joseph Kennedy had telephoned Summer Wells to say that the British wanted one thing of us and one thing only, namely that we put pressure on the Poles. The British felt that they could not do anything of the sort given their obligations, but that the United States could. This idea received no attention from the President, the Secretary, or Summer Wells. Pierpont Moffat, 24th August. It should be noted here that although the contents of the secret protocol to the German-Soviet Treaty of Non-Aggression were known to the U.S. State Department, for unknown reasons, they were not passed on to Warsaw. Krzysztof Siwek, 2019. In view of the fact that we have pretty clear information that the German-Soviet Pact includes a secret arrangement to divide spheres of influence, I am not quite clear how we could word a strong message to Poland. It would have to begin, in view of the fact that your suicide is required, kindly oblige by, etc. Adolf Berl, 24th August. According to Biddle, Hitler is testing us. He absolutely wants to push us to our limits and wants us to strike first. If we remain firm, Hitler will back down. Jan Schembeck, 26th August. Bullitt, under instructions from Roosevelt, was constantly urging the Poles not to make terms with the Germans, and Kennedy, under instructions from Roosevelt, was constantly urging the British to make guarantees to the Poles. Kennedy saw Chamberlain on numerous occasions, urging him, in Roosevelt's name, to do all this, with the implication that the United States would give the British support. After he had given Poland these guarantees, Chamberlain told Kennedy that he hoped the Americans would now be satisfied, that he had signed the doom of civilization. Had it not been for Roosevelt, the British would not have made this, the most gigantic blunder in history.
You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed. Yet I cannot believe that there is anything more or anything different that I could have done and that would have been more successful. Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honorable settlement between Germany and Poland. But Hitler would not have it.